what's up guys, welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, then welcome to our little corner of the internet. Today we're going to be watching a video titled The War of 1812 Explained in 20 Minutes. Without further ado, let's see what this video is about.
From watching the White House burn to the ground, to a naval commander who refused to surrender, to a battle so legendary it was fought after the war was already over. This is the War of 1812 Explained. A war so forgotten, most Americans don't even know we fought it. But without it, the Star-Spangled Banner wouldn't exist, Andrew Jackson would have stayed a nobody, and the United States might have been pushed around by the British Empire forever.
What?
But let's rewind, cause wars don't just pop up overnight. Tensions build, pressure rises, and by the time 1812 rolled around, it exploded. Cause here's the thing. America had only been independent for about 30 years. The ink on the Constitution was barely dry. And already, the British Empire was treating the young nation like it didn't matter. And the disrespect came in three flavors. Number one, impressment, which is just a fancy word for kidnapping. Cause the British Royal Navy was locked in a death match with Napoleon, and they needed sailors, badly. So British warships would stop American merchant vessels in the middle of the ocean, board them, and drag American sailors off the deck, forcing them to serve in the Royal Navy. Hey, you can't just take our guys!
But how can they force them to work for them though? Oh, because if not, they're gonna... Okay.
By 1812, the U.S. state...
I don't know why I'm asking questions, then I respond them to myself in my head, and then yeah, okay. I might be a little crazy.
Department had recorded around 6,000 American citizens impressed into British service. Number two, Britain slapped trade restrictions on the United States, basically telling American merchants they couldn't trade with France or French colonies without British permission. And if they tried, Britain seized the ship. Between 1807 and 1812, Britain grabbed roughly 400 American merchant vessels. Number three, and this one really got under people's skin, Britain was arming and supporting Native American tribes on the western frontier to resist American expansion. So Americans were getting kidnapped at sea, robbed of their trade, and attacked on their own borders. And the response from Britain was, deal with it. Yeah, that was not gonna fly. Cause back in Washington, a group of young, fiery congressmen had had enough. They called themselves the War Hawks, led by Speaker of the House Henry Clay. He argued that America's honor was on the line. And honestly, the dude had a point. Cause if the US couldn't protect its own sailors, defend its own borders, and trade freely with whoever it wanted, then what was the point of independence in the first place? But there was another motive the War Hawks weren't exactly quiet about. Canada. Cause at the time...
Can someone tell me why that hair was in style at some point? Like, is that... For how long was it in style, and how did it even become a thing? You know, the white hair with the rolls? It's such a weird trend.
The War Hawks weren't exactly quiet about. Canada. Cause at the time, Britain controlled most of Canada. And some Americans believed that if we invaded, the Canadians would welcome us as liberators. Even Thomas Jefferson was feeling confident, calling the conquest of Canada a mere matter of marching. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. But this whole War of 1812 thing makes a lot more sense when you look at who led each side. Cause on the American side sat President James Madison, the father of the Constitution, one of the brightest political minds in American history, and a man who stood 5'4" and weighed barely 100 pounds. Sir, we might need to get you a booster seat for the War Council, but don't let the size fool you. Madison was the intellectual architect of the American government itself. The problem was, being brilliant at writing constitutions didn't exactly prepare him for leading a nation into war. Cause Madison faced an impossible choice. If he went to war, America would be fighting the most powerful empire on Earth again.
This is so weird to think about as well, because America is so much bigger. It's so much bigger. It's just like my brain just automatically says like there's no comparison there, but...
And if he did,
I mean, obviously it depends on what type of weapons and everything you have, but...
be fighting the most powerful empire on Earth again. And if he didn't, the British would keep kidnapping American sailors, strangling American trade, and treating the United States like a doormat. So Madison chose to fight, and on June 18, 1812, he signed the Declaration of War. On the other side stood the might of the British Empire, the most powerful military force on the planet. But here's the catch. Britain was already fighting Napoleon in Europe. So for the first 2 years of the war, Americans were basically fighting Britain's B team. And leading the British defense of Canada was Major General Sir Isaac Brock, an aggressive commander who believed the best defense was a devastating offense. And he was about to prove it. Oh boy, here we go! But wait! There's one more important player in this war, and that's Tecumseh, a Shawnee war chief who had spent years building a confederacy of Native American tribes to resist American expansion.
Wow.
Tecumseh was a brilliant strategist, a gifted orator, and the last real hope for organized indigenous resistance east of the Mississippi. And when the war broke out, Tecumseh allied with the British. Not because he loved King George,
Wow.
but because the British promised
This is interesting.
to help protect native lands from the Americans. Great! So we gotta fight the Brits and the natives? But here's the crazy part. Both sides assumed the war would be over quickly. The Americans figured they'd march into Canada, plant the flag, and be home by Christmas. And the British figured the Americans were too disorganized to be a real threat. They were both wrong. Cause the first American invasion of Canada was an absolute catastrophe. General William Hull led a force of about 2,200 men across the Detroit River into Upper Canada. But almost immediately, things fell apart. British forces intercepted his supply convoy, and worse, captured his baggage, which contained his entire invasion plan. Sir, they literally have your playbook!
No.
Meanwhile, General Brock and Tecumseh joined forces, and Brock pulled off one of the craziest bluffs of the war. He sent Hull a message warning that once the fight began, he might not be able to restrain native warriors from attacking American civilians. Hull panicked and surrendered his entire army at Detroit without firing a shot. Over 2,000
No way.
soldiers captured without a fight. But Brock didn't stop there. He rushed east to defend against another American invasion at
What is going on here?
Queenston Heights. American forces had crossed the Niagara River and seized the high ground above the village. But Brock personally led a counterattack, charging uphill toward the American position with his sword raised. It was daring, courageous, and the last thing he ever did. The hero of Upper Canada fell dead on the battlefield. But his troops didn't break. Enraged by the loss of their commander, British regulars and Canadian militia rallied and counterattacked.
This is
And when
crazy.
New York militiamen on
I feel like I'm watching like a movie. I don't know.
the American side refused to cross into Canada to reinforce their own troops, the battle was lost. Nearly 950 American soldiers were captured. So yeah, America learned the hard way that this would not be a quick march up north. But while the war on land was going terribly, something incredible was happening at sea. Cause the USS Constitution, an American frigate built right here in the USA, was about to etch its name in history books. On August 19, 1812, the Constitution squared off against the British frigate HMS Guerriere in the Atlantic. And during the battle, British cannonballs literally bounced off the Constitution's thick oak hull. One American sailor reportedly shouted, "Huzzah! Her sides are made of iron!" And the nickname stuck. Old Ironsides had arrived. The Constitution dismantled the Guerriere in about 30 minutes, then went on to defeat the HMS Java in December. These single-ship victories didn't change the course of the war, but they shattered the myth that the British Navy was unbeatable. That's a moral victory, baby! Let's go, boys! But back on land,
No, but seriously, that must have brought like relief because, you know, you're like, okay, there's something we can actually do. And then that pushes you and motivates. But
things were still a mess, because American
that's a moral victory, baby.
forces tried and failed to capture Montreal. Another invasion of the Niagara Peninsula ended with the British burning the town of Buffalo to the ground in retaliation after Americans had torched the Canadian town of Newark. So yeah, both sides were trading punches, and neither was landing a knockout blow. But the real game changer happened back on the water. Cause by 1813, the war's fate in the Northwest hinged on one thing: who controlled the Great Lakes? And that's where Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry came in, a 27-year-old naval officer who built an entire fleet from scratch on the shores of Lake Erie, cutting down trees, hammering together ships, and training a crew of sailors, soldiers, and frontiersmen who had never fought on water. And in September 1813, Perry's 9 ships met a British squadron of 6 under Captain Robert Barclay at Put-in Bay. The battle was brutal. Perry's flagship, the Lawrence, took hit after devastating hit until it was practically a floating wreck. More than 80% of its crew were killed or wounded. But that's when Perry did something heroic. He grabbed his battle flag, inscribed with the words, "Don't give up the ship," climbed into a small rowboat, and rowed through active cannon fire to reach his second ship, the Niagara. Once aboard, Perry sailed the Niagara straight into the British line and unleashed broadside after broadside at point-blank range. The British surrendered, and Perry sent one of the most famous dispatches in American military history. "Dear General, we have met the enemy, and they are ours." Translation: I just built a fleet from trees, survived my ship being destroyed, rode through a gunfight, and won anyway.
Wait, this is so funny.
Trees, survived my ship being destroyed, rode through a gunfight, and won anyway. You're welcome. But Perry's victory didn't just win the lake, it unlocked the entire Northwest. Cause without control of Lake Erie, the British couldn't supply their forces. So General Henry Proctor began retreating east, dragging his army and Tecumseh's warriors with him. And Tecumseh was furious. He compared Proctor to a fat dog that carries its tail upon its back, but when affrighted, drops it between his legs and runs off. In other words, he's calling you a coward, man. But despite the insults, Proctor kept on retreating, and William Henry Harrison, the American commander, chased him down. Cause they fought the British at Moraviantown, and the battle was over almost before it began. Kentucky mounted cavalry smashed through the British line in minutes, and Proctor fled the field. But Tecumseh didn't run. He stood and fought, and somewhere in the chaos of that battle, gunfire, screaming horses, hand-to-hand combat in the forest, Tecumseh fell. The greatest Native American leader of his generation was dead. His warriors scattered, his alliance crumbled, and Native Americans east of the Mississippi would never again mount an organized resistance. The war in the Northwest had officially turned. But while the Americans were winning in the West, disaster was about to strike at the nation's heart. Cause in 1814, Napoleon was defeated in Europe, which meant Britain could finally turn its full attention and its best troops toward America. And they had a target: Washington, D.C. On August 24, 1814, a force of 4,500 British regulars under Major General Robert Ross marched on the American capital after routing a defending force at the Battle of Bladensburg. A defeat so embarrassing, it was later nicknamed the Bladensburg Races because the American militia ran so fast. Sir, I don't think they're racing for a gold medal. With the capital defenseless, the British marched into Washington and set it ablaze.
But isn't this the war that we've, what I was going to say, that isn't this the story of the Star-Spangled Banner, the one that I watched with my dad? I also watched it like at the start of this channel, right?
And set it ablaze.
Like this exact war. I mean, I know it's in this video, but
the White House, the Capitol building, the Treasury, the War Department. Flames lit up the night sky for miles. It was the only time since the Revolution that a foreign power captured and occupied the U.S. Capitol. But there's one part of this story that became legend. As the British closed in, First Lady Dolly Madison refused to flee until she'd secured one thing: a full-length portrait of George Washington. With no time to spare, she ordered her staff to grab the portrait and haul it out before the British stormed the White House. making sure the father of the country wouldn't fall into enemy hands.
Wow.
That's not just quick thinking.
That is dedication.
It's legendary teamwork. Now, the British only occupied Washington for about 26 hours before a violent storm, possibly a tornado, swept through the burning city, scattering their forces and convincing them to leave. But the damage was already done. The nation's capital was in ashes. But it wasn't just the capital under threat, because in September 1814, a massive British invasion force of over 10,000 troops marched south from Canada towards Plattsburgh, New York, and landed on the shores of Lake Champlain. The British game plan seized northern New York, but American Commodore Thomas McDonough had a plan of his own. He anchored his ships in Plattsburgh Bay and used a brilliant technique, spring lines on the anchors. So in the middle of the fight, he could literally spin his ships, bringing fresh cannons to bear while the damaged side swung away. This move was so insane, it actually worked. Cause the British naval squadron was destroyed, its commander killed, and without naval support, the British Army turned around and marched back to Canada. It was a critical American victory that sent shockwaves to the peace negotiators in Europe. America isn't going anywhere. But the British weren't finished. They set their sights on Baltimore, one of America's largest and most important cities. And in September 1814, British ground forces landed at North Point, south of the city. But American defenders put up a fierce fight, and a sharpshooter killed General Ross himself. Meanwhile, Vice Admiral Alexander Cochrane's warships moved into position to bombard Fort McHenry, the star-shaped fortress guarding Baltimore's harbor. And for 25 straight hours, British ships hurled an estimated 1,500 to 1,800 mortar shells and rockets at the fort. The sky lit up with explosions, the ground shook, and inside the fort, American soldiers held on. And watching all of this from a British ship in the harbor was a young American lawyer named Francis Scott Key. He'd gone aboard to negotiate the release of a captured American prisoner, but the British refused to let him leave until after the attack. So Key watched, all through the night, through the rockets, the bombs, and the smoke.
This is definitely the story of the Star-Spangled Banner. Spangled? I hope I say that right.
And as dawn broke, Key looked toward the fort. And there it was. Through the clearing smoke, a massive American flag, 30 by 42 feet, still flying over Fort McHenry. The fort had held. Baltimore had survived. And Key, overcome with emotion, pulled out a scrap of paper and began scribbling a poem right there on the ship. And the rocket's red glare, the bombs burst.
Is that true? Right there in the ship? I pulled out a piece of paper in mid-war? Could be.
Bursting in air gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. He finished it later that night at a Baltimore hotel, a poem that would eventually become the Star-Spangled Banner and the national anthem of the United States. Man, that still chokes me up. By late 18...
That's beautiful though. But I remember when I watched the Star-Spangled Banner, a lot of you guys were saying in the comments that there's some misinformation in that video. And I don't know if it was regarding of the song or regarding what. I can't remember exactly, but somebody let me know.
1814, both sides were exhausted. Britain had spent 2 decades fighting Napoleon and had no appetite for another long war across the Atlantic. And America's treasury was nearly bankrupt. So on December 24th, 1814, diplomats signed the Treaty of Ghent in Belgium. And here's the kicker. It basically restored everything to how it was before the war. No territory changed hands and no mention of trade rights. On paper, nobody won. And here's the wildest part. The war's primary cause, impressment, wasn't even mentioned in the treaty. The British stopped impressing American sailors, but only because Napoleon was defeated and they didn't need him anymore. So
Wow.
We fought a whole war over something that solved itself? Well, not so fast. 'Cause 2 weeks after the treaty was signed, but before the
They basically obligated America to ally with them.
news could cross the Atlantic, the war's most epic battle was about to go down. Major General Andrew Jackson, a tough-as-nails Tennessee frontiersman who had already crushed the Creek Nation at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend, was waiting in New Orleans with a ragtag army of regulars, militia, free black soldiers, Choctaw warriors, and even pirates led by Jean Lafitte. Sir, did you just recruit pirates? On the other side were 8,000 British veterans, seasoned troops fresh from defeating Napoleon, led by Major General Sir Edward Pakenham. These were among the finest soldiers in the world. And on the morning of January 8, 1815, they marched in perfect formation across an open field toward Jackson's fortified line. Jackson's 5,000 defenders waited behind earthworks and cotton bales. And when the British came within range, the British fell in waves. They regrouped, charged again, and fell again. In just 37 minutes, it was over. The British suffered around 2,000 casualties, including General Pakenham himself, who was killed leading the assault. The Americans, only 71 casualties. It was one of the most lopsided victories in American military history. And Jackson, covered
That's so much people.
in mud, became the most famous man in America overnight. And when the news of New Orleans reached Washington at almost the exact same time as the Treaty of Ghent, Americans didn't care about the fine print. To them, it felt like a victory. A massive, undeniable, glorious victory. Woohoo! Jackson would ride that wave all the way to the presidency in 1828. What a legend! But there was one more consequence of the war that most people overlook: the collapse of the Federalist Party. 'Cause the Federalists had opposed the war from the start. They'd even held a secret convention in Hartford to discuss their grievances. And when the war ended in what looked like a victory, the Federalists looked like unpatriotic cowards. The party never recovered, and by 1816, it was effectively dead. 'Cause in the end, the War of 1812 didn't just test America, it forged it. An estimated 15,000 Americans died, from battlefields, disease, and the slow devastation of a war that most people have forgotten, which is just insane to think about. But from its ashes came something powerful, a surge of national pride, a new anthem born from the smoke of Fort McHenry, and a generation of leaders who would shape the nation for decades. For America, the War of 1812 was the moment it stopped being a former colony and started being a country. God bless America, man. I freaking love you guys. But if you thought the War of 1812 was intense,
I just wait. Oh,
that
sorry.
was just the sequel. 'Cause this is the American Revolution explained. From barefoot farmers taking on the most powerful army on earth, to a midnight crossing of the Delaware River that changed the course of history. Click.
Oh yeah, we need to watch that at some point. But I just find his storytelling so funny, and like the videos I really enjoy them. But thank you guys so much for joining me for this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. I was a bit shocked by the fact that he said that it's like most Americans don't even know this war was fought, because it was one of the first videos that I made, and I know for a fact a lot of Americans know this war was fought. So, but yeah, leave your thoughts in the comments below. Please leave a like, subscribe if you haven't yet, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!